Mr. Spencer? I was going to say make yourself comfortable, but that's probably not as easy this morning. So we appreciate you coming to join us today, and we'll look forward to your comments. Feel
Sure.
free to start when you're ready.
I'd like to thank you all for your service on the commission. I did get to meet several of you during the course of this process, and I appreciate the time I got to spend with some of you. During the course of all those interviews, a few things came up consistently. Well, first, why you want to be a judge and what you think you can bring with you to the Court of Appeals. And I'd always told the story about my love of learning and my drew me to law school, and my desire to apply the facts in the law and problem solve, and that is what kind of put in the back of my mind when I was a young student in law school that maybe I might want to be a judge someday. This might be something to consider, but obviously as a young attorney, you kind of put aside those notions and get down to learning the business of the practice of law. And I've been in private practice for 17 years almost, practicing some in civil law early on in my career, and more in areas of workers' compensation, administrative law, and appeals later in my career and more recently. I think throughout my time in the law, I've tried to disagree with people without being disagreeable, try to be courteous and kind to the people I come across throughout my day, whether that be other attorneys or just your clients, the other parties. And I feel that's something important that I've picked up throughout my years of practice. I believe that in terms of what you do as a lawyer, as an advocate, it helps to draw upon the experiences of those around you, whether those be your colleagues in your office, poking your head in your office to ask questions, bounce ideas off of. You can draw upon the wealth of experience that are available to you from the people around you. And I've tried to do that throughout the course of my years in practice. And obviously my practice has taken me all over the state of Iowa. Whether it was in civil matters, I went to various courts, rural, urban counties around the state. You'd sit with lawyers and talk about the issues and what is going on in those areas. And in workers' compensation, obviously my practice touches rural Iowa farmers, small employers, all over the state. So you get a good cross-section of the people and the issues that face them. And so I feel like I can bring some of that with me to the court, and those are some things that I've learned throughout the course of my practice. Obviously, my areas of specialty, I think, are something that is not as represented on the Court of Appeals now. I don't know that there's anybody who's practiced in workers' compensation quite as extensively as maybe I have, or dealt with some of the administrative law as much. And so I feel that is another thing I can kind of bring, is that wealth of experience in an area that may not be as represented on the court. And obviously add to the breadth of knowledge that is available on the Court of Appeals. And so those are some of the things I think I can bring. Obviously, I'm an advocate now. You're kind of the front-facing part of the court. You're the one who deals with the parties most directly. You have to explain to them, people of various levels of sophistication, what the law is and what the impact of it is on you. And that is very fresh in my mind, is because that's part of what we do. And so I feel like that is something I can also bring, is that experience. It's very fresh in my mind, and try to remember that the parties that come before you also need to understand what you're doing, and you're writing not just for attorneys and the precedential values you may set, and you may be cited by those attorneys. You have to write and make things understandable to the people who come before you. They're very important matters, probably the most important things those people will be engaged in. And so you have to make them feel like they were heard and understood. And even if you don't go their way or rule in their favor, you have to try to show that you heard them, you've addressed their arguments. And I feel like as a practicing attorney, that's something that's very fresh in your mind, because you have to explain things to those parties. And so those are some things I think I can bring with me, and those experiences I can bring with me to add to the Court of Appeals. But obviously I wanted to kind of leave it open to you all for some questions, and let you ask anything you'd like. So I'd like to give over the rest of my time to any questions.
We'll start with Commissioner Hartkoff.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you very much for appearing today and applying for the vacancy. You talked about your experience in workers' compensation and how the current set of judges on the Court of Appeals may not have as deep of an experience as you do. Can you talk about the benefits of somebody who might serve on the court having that kind of experience?
Well, a fair amount of workers' compensation cases do end up at the Court of Appeals. And so that is something that would be helpful to have some knowledge in that particular area of the law. And that would be beneficial to addressing those issues, because I hear it is a very collegial court, and so you can offer some of that expertise in ruling on those matters. And so I feel like having some areas of experience that may not be as represented can be beneficial.
Commissioner Spies.
Good morning.
Morning.
Obviously, a lot of the weight of the court also is in family law cases and criminal law cases. Tell me what steps you would take to come up to speed quickly and hit the road running.
Well, like I said, I'd always kind of had a lifelong love of learning and learning new areas. I feel it helps us grow to know where we're strong and know where we're not strong. And I know that is an area I would have to work on. And I do relish that as a new and challenge that I would have to take on to review the law. I remember when I first came out into practice, you come out thinking like a lawyer, but you may not know a lot of the nuts and bolts of the law. And my first order of business was to sit down and read the Iowa Practice Series, the treatise on workers' compensation, front to back 4 or 5 times, to make sure I understood the law before I start going out and trying to give advice to people or argue these points. I feel it is incumbent upon you to try to see where you are weak, and I enjoy the process of study and learning the law. And so I definitely think that is something I can bring, and what I will do if I would be put on the Court of Appeals to address those weaknesses. I understand that, so I will obviously do that.
Yeah, and as you know, those Iowa practice books are getting thicker and thicker by the year.
They are, every year.
Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you so much for applying. If a case required you to learn about a specific industry that you were not familiar with or subject matter, how would you go about doing that?
Well, I think research is always something I've enjoyed, kind of going out and seeing about things. I just ask my wife, anytime I pick up a new hobby, it's usually preceded by a ton of research to figure out all the ins and outs of something new. And I think that is something I would do. If I don't understand an area, I would try to familiarize myself with issues. There's obviously a wealth of knowledge on the internet, and you always have other people that you can draw upon that may have some experience in those particular areas if you need to get some background information. Whether that would be if you're sitting on the court, another judge who maybe has more experience with a certain industry or a certain area. Those are the kind of things you can do. Nobody necessarily has to be an island. They can draw upon the wealth of experiences that are available to them and around them to try to make them issue better decisions or understand areas where they maybe do not understand.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stanger.
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Picklap.
Nothing, thanks.
Commissioner Semmelroth.
Is there a particular judge that you've appeared in front of or that you've worked with who you would use as a role model if you were on the Court of Appeals?
Well, one of the ones I always remember is early on in my career, a deputy commissioner, one of the judges over at the commissioner's office, a gentleman named Claire Kramer. I always appreciated him and the way he handled himself and conducted himself in the courtroom. He was very respectful of all of the litigants, let the parties kind of present their case, and I feel he judged the facts fairly on the merits. You may not have agreed with what he did all the time, but at least you feel like he heard what you were trying to say and addressed the issues you brought to him. And that is kind of the model I would like to take as a judge, that kind of a role model.
Thank you.
Commissioner Roberts.
No questions.
Commissioner Schnurr.
Could you explain for us briefly your decision-making process if you were to come onto the court, especially in one of these new areas of the law that you've said you don't have a lot of experience in?
Well, obviously, you start first with the nuts and bolts of learning the area of the law, picking up reviewing the statutes, reviewing the cases, getting that together and making sure you have an understanding of what the law is and what the law says. And then from there, obviously, you go and look at the facts from wherever those came, whether those are jury verdicts from the commissioner, that could be findings of fact, and you have to then just apply the facts to the law and let that take you where it may. Obviously, that's, I think, the important thing to do in terms of addressing the cases that would come before you. And especially in areas of the law I may not be as familiar with, I feel it would be good to start with a thorough research and understanding of the law. Reading those cases, going back to the beginning. Even in an area of the law I practice a fair amount, I find it is useful sometimes to go back to the beginning, like you don't know anything about the law. You never know what you might pick up, what you might see, a new perspective you might not have thought about before. And so I feel like that is what I would try to do on all cases, not just cases that maybe are in an area I'm not as familiar with.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoiting,
I have no questions, thank you.
Commissioner Hoyt,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Parrish.
Yes, could you tell us a little bit about your commitment and interest in pro bono work? I know we've chatted about that, so could you explain your thoughts on that?
Obviously, I have not done as much pro bono work over the years in terms of addressing the issues. Obviously, I do see the VLP cases that come across Polk County, and a lot of those come up in areas of family law, probate, and those things. And in terms of addressing those, I have not done as many of those. We've donated to kind of the Iowa Legal Aid Fund to fund lawyers who can devote their full attention and practice to issues like that. Obviously, I learned years ago in the law, you don't want to dabble in an area you don't know about. In terms of taking on one case, you may be doing a disservice to yourself and to your client. You may be able to get up to speed and get a basic understanding, but I feel like if you really want to help the people, you need to make it a regular part of what you do and a big part of your practice. And such as an area in family law, if you go on the Court of Appeals, that's going to become a big area of what you do, criminal law, and you would study and get up to speed on it. And so I do believe providing the services for the people who cannot necessarily afford or access justice is important. And that's kind of how we have done that at our firm anyway.
Thank you.
Commissioner Henderson,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Markwart.
Thank you for your application today. So not to sort of beat a dead horse, but you've got a lot of workers' compensation experience. Another thing that's not happening in the workers' compensation realm is jury trials. We get appeals from jury trials, you know, especially in the criminal realm. How can you address that weakness in your application?
In terms of trial work, I have been involved in some civil cases over the years, although I don't recall ever trying a jury trial. I've tried various other kinds of proceedings, whether those are small claims or things to the bench before. But in terms of the issues regarding jury trials, jury verdicts, I have some familiarity with the process over the years. We have a lot of attorneys who've dealt with jury trials, so obviously you hear them talking about the issues that come up in civil litigation, in jury trials, and the kinds of things that they deal with. And again, I feel like drawing upon that wealth of experience does help in terms of learning about kind of the issues that face those attorneys and things that they have to have addressed. And so I feel like that is how I would kind of try to make up for some of my deficiency maybe in not having done as much of that work. You can always lean upon others to help in terms of what issues face them so you can get a better sense of what goes on and try to address that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Pearson.
Good morning, and thank you for being with us. When we met, you talked about the fact that your jobs has required you to travel the state and broaden your experience. How do you feel that statewide exposure that you've had would benefit serving on the Court of Appeals?
Well, obviously, the Court of Appeals hears cases from all parts of Iowa in all areas. And I do feel that having gone to these places, I have gone and met with people such as farmers, small employers, various parties to cases over the years, gone and practiced and done things at courthouses all over the state. Helps you get some experience with the issues that face the people in those areas and the things that matter to them. So you can get a better sense of how things came to the court, maybe the underpinnings of the whys and what motivated the people. To give you a more full understanding of kind of the issues you're being presented with. It's one thing to review a record, it's one thing to kind of have some idea of what goes on in some of those places. And I feel like that is something that would be beneficial. My practice has taken me to all the corners of the state. And I've had some experience with a wide breadth of people and courts around the state.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chase.
Thank you for your application. One of the things that I think is important for Court of Appeals judges is to have empathy for the parties. Explain how your practice has given you the opportunity to show empathy to your clients.
Well, I believe having some degree of empathy, not just for your clients, but for the other parties. It does help, even as an advocate, to get a sense of what is motivating the other parties, why they're arguing what they're arguing, what it is they need, in addition just to your own clients. And as a practicing attorney, that's kind of what we do. We're the forward-facing part of the court system. We have to address these issues for our clients. They come to us with their problems, and we have to try to craft a solution within the bounds of the law, or at least something that we can advocate for within the bounds of the law. And I feel like that is a big part of what you do. You always have to keep in mind that there are parties behind these disputes, and these are the most important matters that may come up in their lives. And you see that, whether I'm dealing with an employer who maybe this is their first workers' compensation claim ever, and obviously they're anxious about that. And you have to walk them through the process and try to explain it in a way that they can grasp and they can understand, because you're dealing with people of all levels of sophistication. You may be dealing with the general counsel of a large employer, or you could be dealing with somebody who's a couple-man shop running a construction company. And I feel like that is something I can bring as a practicing attorney to the court, is that's very fresh in my mind in terms of dealing with the people, trying to understand the people, trying to craft solutions to their problems, whether that's addressing that with the other parties and trying to figure out what they need to get a case resolved or settled. Some cases obviously have to go to trial, go to court, but a fair amount of cases do resolve. And I feel like that is something I've tried to do throughout the course of my practice and dealing with the people I've come across throughout the course of my dealings.
Thank you.
Commissioner Graber?
Thank you again for being here this morning and putting yourself in front of the public. That means a lot. What is it about being a judge on the Court of Appeals that compels you to be here today?
Well, I mean, obviously I talked a little bit about my law school experience and kind of what drew me to the notion I might maybe want to do this someday. Obviously, I took one last little push out the door from somebody who mentioned, hey, you might want to apply for this. You might want to do this. And that kind of brought me here now. Obviously, my practice has focused more on research and writing, appellate work. And that is something I did enjoy in law school, the researching, the writing, the crafting the solutions, coming to the answer. And so that would be what kind of specifically drew me to something like the Court of Appeals, where a big part of the work is research and writing. That is kind of the stock and trade of the Court of Appeals. And so that is kind of what drew me to this, and something that I might find rewarding or I might enjoy doing in a way I might like to contribute to the system.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the commissioner? Well, you're excused then.
Well,
Thank you so much, Mr. Spencer.
Thank you.